It works. We are recording. Hello and welcome. I'm going to do it again. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next edition of Re-Educate Humanity with my guest, Eden, poet Jennifer Eden. And on Instagram, she is Slut of the Month, which is an awesome Instagram name. You're going to tell us a story about that in a moment. But just a little bit of a background on Eden, who's joining us. Her motto is pleasure over everything, P-O-E-T. She puts her work and life into everything that she does. She's a Baltimore-based poet, event host, and sex educator. This Black, queer, non-binary femme has been schooling folks on consent, gender affirmation, language, and kink dynamics everywhere from BDSM dungeons to Ivy League universities up and down the East Coast for over a decade. She is 1/3 of the Hoax Hive. Am I saying it right?
The Hoe Hive.
The Hoe Hive. Oh, I like it. H-A-U-X Hive, a collection focused on creating safer spaces for queer women of color to explore their sexuality. And she's the producer of Poet and Pasties, a monthly open mic burlesque brunch held at the famous Busboys and Poets. In June of 2018, she was named the first ever Slut of the Month by Amber Rose's My Slutbox platform. Thank you, Eden, for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you.
You're welcome. I'm excited that we're making this happen.
I know we've been talking about it for a while. So please tell me a little bit about your background, how you got into this. Give us a little high-level overview of you.
All right. Well, I always start my background in sexuality education with the fact that I was labeled a slut way before I ever had sex. And so it put me in the position to know more about my body and my sexuality and how other people received it than the average pre-teen would be expected to know. But once I realized that the fact that I had boobs and hips at a very young age meant that I was going to get a lot of sexual attention, that also made me the resident sexpert for all of my middle school and high school friends. And so it wasn't until college that I started to really formalize that, and I became an on-campus peer educator at Bowie State University. Yes, HBCU grad here. And I really took it upon myself to reframe the way that we taught sexuality and sex education, because essentially a peer educator was like a sex ed teacher student. So we went around to dorms and put on different events around sexuality and safer sex and not getting an STI and not getting pregnant. And I'm like, we're in college, we want to have fun and freely fuck because our parents aren't in our house, and we want to
hashtag freely fuck.
Exactly. So it became really annoying trying to get people to pay attention to don't get an STD and don't get pregnant.
Yeah.
So I took it upon myself to make that sexuality curriculum about pleasure and about ways to experience pleasure that reduce your risk of pregnancy if that's not what you wanted, and reduce your risk of STI, and ways to experience pleasure without penetration. And so that was really a conversation that wasn't happening on that campus, and I realized is a conversation that still isn't happening between consenting partners, between friend groups. And so that's me. That's what I do. I talk about sex from a pleasure-centered perspective.
I love it. Okay, thank you. I have a question from when you first started sharing your story, which is that you were labeled a slut even before you had sex. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, so I think that that's the case for most people who are labeled a slut or a hoe or whatever other language is tied. And it's usually women, it's usually femme presenting people who get these labels. And it has more so to do with how we look and the attention that we get than anything we actually do. I was called a slut for the first time when I was 9, and I didn't know what that meant, and I had to go home and ask, and nobody knew why I was asking, and nobody wanted to give me the real answer because I was 9. So it's been a very interesting journey of reclaiming that word and redefining that word.
So But you
And
weren't
so now,
playing necessarily. You weren't playing or doing stuff like non-penetration sex that you wouldn't call sex, and you weren't doing all this other stuff. Even if you were, that'd be completely fine. But it was just because of your curves and because of the way you were built and you were developing early, so people were like shaming you, basically.
absolutely, it was absolutely a shaming tactic. It was absolutely a way to kind of control my body and my self concept. I was not sexually active at that age, but because of my body and my development, it was assumed that I was. And so, from, like I said, from a very early age, that was the label that was put on me. It wasn't until very recently that I reclaimed that word and put it on myself.
Wow. Did it cause you to become more, I guess it pushes you into creating an identity for yourself because you're clearly smart and motivated and confident and all of that good stuff. So clearly you turned it into like a mission, like a life exploration to be able to take it to the next level and figure out what that actually means for you and all that good stuff. But did it turn you into more of a sexual person earlier than you think it would have? Or was it more just exploring and
It made me seek out answers. I did a lot of reading and still do. A lot of my, I guess, knowledge on the topic of sexuality comes from reading, comes from watching documentaries, comes from watching porn for research as opposed to for pleasure.
Mhm.
It comes from talking to people about the
Yeah,
sex that they
separate
have,
conversation.
sex that they want to have.
Mhm.
And so, like, yes, I am definitely a sexually liberated and sexually exploratory person. But my experience is not what I draw on to educate others. My body is not anybody else's body. The way that I receive pleasure may not be the way anybody else receives pleasure. So it's really important to have a really wide perspective and like to be able to draw on other people's experiences, other people's research, that can pour into all of that.
Sure, that makes sense. Okay, got it. I'm definitely someone who I'm like my own guinea pig, right? So I've
Mhm.
been trying to figure out sexuality and sex and just how that whole world works, like what I'm allowed to do, how much do you share, if I get shamed and all that good stuff, like fuck it, I don't give a fuck. I'd rather just be able to be open. But then it plays a part in how people see you and how people act around you and in business, et cetera, et cetera. And I've luckily been of the belief system of fuck it, I just don't give a fuck. Like if you don't like me because I speak my mind and do what I want to do and I don't shame myself, then fuck it, you're not the right person for me. But it does come at a cost to be open and honest about it. But I definitely use my own experiences, um, just because I guess that's the stuff that I'm closest to, and it's the stuff that I know the best. But along those lines, one of the reasons that I wanted to interview you and talk with you is because you do specialize in having conversations around, um, non-shaming play and non-shaming, like sex, sexuality, whatever you're like. There's words, right? There's words like kink, fetish. Um, there's the label of BDSM. There's all this different stuff. So, normal there's like normal missionary style sex, and then it just develops out from there, right? There's you can have multiple partners, you can have different forms of relationships, you can have different forms of things that bring you pleasure that other people might think it might bring someone else pain. So the topic of our conversation today is, how do you engage in a relationship with someone that has a very different level of interest in different forms of sexual exploration, and how do you not shame them, and how do you have those conversations? If you're the person that has other interests other than your partner, how do you bring that up to your partner, and how do you receive that on the other side? So we can just jump in with whatever you want. I have some questions personally, I have examples. If you have anything that you wanted to share, go ahead, and then I can ask both of us some questions to kind of dive in and help people understand better. And the whole premise is to be able to give people language, like you talk about, like I talk about, to be able to have fun, enjoy, be respectful of others. But people really need language. They really need to have examples. They need to know what works for us or what's worked for other people that we know of, so that they can enjoy people that are not exactly like them sexually, but they just fucking adore and they don't want to not be with. They want to figure out how to like be sexually compatible or at least sexually respectful of each other.
Absolutely. Language is super important when it comes to talking about any part of yourself. Like you said in my bio, I am a Black queer non-binary femme, and it is important for
You say it much
anybody.
better than I do.
Well, I've had a lot of practice saying it.
Yeah.
But it's important for anybody that I'm involved with to be able to respect and affirm all parts of that. And so my non-binary identity means that masculinity and femininity are both present in the way that I interact with my partners and the way that I interact with the world. And I've absolutely had partners who completely ignored my masculinity because they felt like it infringed upon theirs, or there wasn't space for like two people to hold masculine energy in one relationship or in one dynamic. But all bodies have masculine and feminine energy within them. And we show them differently and we carry them differently. And so in our society, with this very like heteronormative umbrella over everything, we have this like man, woman, male, female kind of standard that we even queer relationships and queer identities in. And so being myself and presenting the way that I present, I often have to like be like, hey, remember, like I'm non-binary, there's masculinity here, like let's affirm that. I don't always have to be like high femme when we're going out. I don't have to always put on a dress and heels. Like I can feel sexy in other ways. And like I hope that you think I'm sexy in other ways also. And so
So what
being
do you
able
do when you feel like that's not being honored? Like how do you talk about that? Or I mean, because there's just like the being able to perform your, it's not even like your sexuality or your gender, it's just like perform you, right? Or not even perform is such a weird word, but like just there's like the first level of just like being able to be you, and then it drops down into like when you get into the sex or you get into the other stuff, and then how it permeates into that, you know?
Yeah, and I think perform is absolutely the right word. Like we perform gender, we perform sexiness, we perform femininity or masculinity, and we perform success and financial stability and like all of these things that go into how we feel about ourselves and how we interact with our partners. And so if any of those things aren't affirmed, then the sex is going to be trash. Like if you feel like the work that you do and the way that you look and the life that you live are not safe in the sex that you're having, then how is it going to be good sex?
Yeah.
So it's important not only to like ask some vetting questions early on to just kind of like see where the person's head is on certain things to make sure that you're safe and that you're compatible in those ways, but also to like safely check in and be like, hey, I know that I introduced myself this way and I feel like parts of that are being ignored. And I want to know if it's because you're uncomfortable or because you just don't know how to affirm those things or because you've never been with a me before. So you don't know the specific combination.
I love that. You've never been with a me before. So if you'd like the instruction manual, I'm happy to jot one down, send it over to you.
Exactly. Like we tend to take however or like whatever worked in our last relationship or our last partnership or our last fuckship and be like, oh, this worked over there, this worked with them, so I'm gonna do that in my next situation.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's important to know and grow and realize that like, oh, I was treating this other person like trash and then I stopped and things got better, so like, yes, treat people well. But you can't take this exact formula that worked with one person and apply it to the next person, because nobody is going to have the same exact Rubik's Cube of characteristics. So they're not going to feel affirmed and sexy in the same way as someone else does.
Absolutely. So what would be examples, do you think, of like the qualifying questions like you were talking about that you can ask in the beginning? Like I know for me, I'll ask people if they're bi. I'll ask people if they like to have threesomes. I'll ask people, you know, if they're into BDSM stuff. I'll ask them what they're into. I ask people oftentimes what their biggest fantasy is that they've never been able to play out, because then it helps me to understand like what I might be able to add to their life that could be fun, that we could explore together. But it also shows me what their limit is, like what they've come up to in terms of their play or activity or fantasies, what they want to go beyond. So it doesn't catch me off guard. That's one of my favorite questions, is like, what's your biggest fantasy you haven't played out? And then if it's like something that just freaks me the fuck out, like I'm fully aware that maybe we could like play once for energy's sake, but it's probably not going to go beyond that because they're like on a whole different level than me, or I'm on a whole different level than them, you know?
No, the questions that you listed were great. I think that asking people like what their fantasies are is a really good way to gauge like what they're open to.
Mm.
I think that like there are some questions that come up in like, those like glamour Cosmo questionnaires where it's like, where's the wildest place you've ever had sex? Or like, what's the who's the person you've had sex with that you shouldn't have? Like questions like that can be pretty telling, but are also like kind of vanilla in my opinion. So first and foremost, I ask, how do you identify? Because I think that is very telling of how receptive someone will be to my identity.
And your identity plays a big role, because for people that aren't aware of the language you're using and the what we're talking about, I'll just give a little disclaimer. But like when you're as advanced as you are, and I appreciate that you can enjoy the masculinity and the femininity inside of yourself when you show up into a relationship like that with that, then you have to have a partner that will appreciate both sides of you, or all of you, or else you're not going to really feel like satisfied or seen or understood. And it has nothing to do with your body parts. It's not about being like transgendered or transsexual or anything like that. It's literally, there's like, it's so cool to me. There's so many like layers of identity and how you are. And it's so beautiful because in this day and age, thank God, we're getting a little bit more advanced as each day passes, so that you can really like, the language exists so you can communicate with your partner and you can enjoy yourself and them more, and be open and be like transparent like that and be vulnerable like that. So it's really cool. But I just kind of wanted to give a little bit of an overview and the simplest background a little bit, so that people that aren't familiar with language or even understanding kind of like what that is could understand a little bit more, and add whatever you like. That was my like high level overview.
Yeah, I think that even in a like heteronormative straight context, asking how you identify, asking a partner how they identify can be really telling of like what they're open to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if
It's true.
a person says that they are bisexual or even bi-curious, and then the person that they're interested in is like, oh no, I would never date a bisexual person. Great. We don't even have to finish these drinks. I can go home and enjoy a bath and my vibrator and like not even worry about what you're doing with the rest of your day.
Exactly.
You can save yourself all of that emotional labor up front.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's also important to ask if how someone eyes like match with their desires and what they actually do, because someone might identify as straight but really enjoy sex with someone of the same gender as themselves, but because they don't engage in romantic relationships, they might not consider that they might be bisexual, or that there might be another word that more accurately represents how they actually present in the world.
Mm-hmm. That's a really powerful distinguisher. I think also because a lot of the shame around like homosexuality or bisexuality, there's a lot of people that would never identify as that. But I've dated people who were 100% bisexual men and would never, I mean, even to this day, wouldn't admit it, because that was shameful to them. But to me, it was deception not to be told that. And but I couldn't really be too upset with them, because they're even lying to themselves because of the shame and the guilt and the fear and the paranoia about what it would mean if they were open. And so yeah, it's interesting.
There's a lot of safety in heterosexual identity, and it makes life a lot less complicated if you just say I'm straight and that's it, and you can move on to the next question or the next part of the evening. But if your answer is something more complex, like I'm bi-curious, or I'm queer, or I only date men but I play with people of multiple genders, then that can be really honestly annoying and tiresome to explain. And so some folks rightfully don't make that information available up front because
Yeah.
they don't feel like doing the work if it's not for somebody that's going to be around for a while, or not for somebody who they feel is going to even be able to take in and understand what any of that shit means.
Yeah.
So people, I think people absolutely get the right to pick and choose up front what parts of themselves they want to share and what parts of themselves they want to explain. And then when it gets to when it gets to the point of, starting a sexual relationship with somebody, or if it's somebody that you decide you want to date more seriously or introduce to other people or whatever the case may be, then you might want to have some more in-depth conversations. But first date, like if you don't feel safe disclosing anything about, the way that
That's
you,
telling of the relationship too, if you don't feel safe. Sorry.
yeah, no, you're right. Like it's really telling of like where the relationship has the potential to go if you don't feel safe up front, and if you feel like you're always going to have to do this work of explaining this like baseline of who you are and what you want and what you like that can be exhausting. So it's
Yeah.
important to find some kind of common ground, even if it's just like in the kink context, like, oh, well, we both are into, I don't know, rope play. Like we're both curious about this one thing. So yeah, we can find some common ground on that. And we both recognize that that's kind of an alternative practice and something that isn't super safe to talk about, at work or like with your mom. So we can relate on that. But there are certain other things that like folks are absolutely at risk of like losing their livelihood, losing their jobs, losing the custody of their kids if they share. So like, why would they feel safe sharing it with you on a first date?
Mm. That's so interesting for myself personally because I'm so into honesty. Like if someone asks me what my identity is, it's honesty. Like I really that's like the highest on the totem pole. That's it. So for me it's always felt like deception if someone isn't open with me, but I'm grateful for you sharing that because it's true. Like if someone doesn't share something, it's I need to appreciate that they literally could be they could lose a lot of parts of their lives or that their lives could be compromised in some way um, if that identity got out. And of course, I want them to trust me, but we all know how trust works, and people can be amazing one day and your enemy unfortunately the next, especially in romantic situations, which really sucks. So how much do you share and how much do you trust someone? And it's interesting, and it's definitely a very interesting and good point. I believe that if someone can be honest with me, or this is my experience, if someone's honest with me, no matter what the hell they're sharing, I don't even care. It could be as far from my scope of interest or as close to my scope of interest, but the more they share with me, the more it turns me on, the more I feel open, and I'm like, wow, this person really like trusts me, that they're willing to share all this shit with me. Like this is amazing, and it makes me even open to exploring stuff with them because they're willing to open themselves to me. Like I was talking to a guy the other day and he was telling me that he's even like bi-curious. He's never actually had sex with a man, but he would be open to that. And, he's stereotypically like very straight, heterosexual man, goes through a lot of women. And I was like, wow, it made me look at him in a different way, not in a negative way, but just like, wow, he's so open-minded, because I believe that everyone has a little bit of bi-curiosity in them. Like, why would you, if you're at all a sexual creature, why would you not just rule it out and make sure that you don't like fucking whatever else exists in the world? Do you know what I mean? Men, women, you know.
I disagree. I
Okay.
think that you can absolutely be free in sexual exploration, but still have boundaries around who it is that you will engage with. I myself do not engage with cisgender men at all. That is
Okay.
not something that
Cisgender men, describe that to the people at home that have no idea what you're talking about.
a cisgender man is somebody who was assigned male at birth and lived their life up with that. So when they were born, the doctor said it's a boy, and they grew up agreeing with that. So cisgender is a word that came into our language because we needed a way to say not transgender.
Interesting. Okay, got it.
So I think that exploration can be free and safe and curious and inquisitive and all of these things, but still have boundaries in place. And that boundary can very much include a gender boundary.
Oh, of course. Yeah. for me, I like when people are open, not so much in like what they're willing to do, but what they're willing to share with me. For me, that's kind of like important. But I think it's interesting also because it's such a beautiful thing to talk to you, because like we were saying, there's layers, you know, there's gender, there's sexuality, there's desires, there's expectations, there's honesty, there's all these different layers, which is really, really cool. So for you personally, if you're willing to share, and you can ask, I'll answer as well. But what are some of the things that you've experienced like personally in relationships when you have some sort of like distinguisher between what your hard limit is and what other people's desires are, and how do you balance that?
So I think that for me, the point of contention is always around like strap-ons. Um, so I have one, I use one. It's very much a part of like my sexual practice. And because I tend to date masculine presenting people, um, there usually is some like confusion around why me, who showed up in a dress and heels, would even like consider wearing a strap on for any reason, especially to like penetrate my partner. And so that's definitely been a topic of conversation, because that's like, it's not a conversation when somebody like is born with a dick and shows up to a sexual encounter with it. Like it's expected that it's going to be used, right? But when you're not born with it, there has to be, and I mean, there should be a conversation around it regardless of if you were born with it or not, because sex doesn't have to include penetration. But when you're not born with it, there's this whole other conversation around not only like, well, why is this something that you're into, but like, what does it mean for the recipient? What does it mean about their identity? What does it mean about their like gender role or their like ability to reciprocate? And it doesn't have to mean anything. It can mean that this is something that you wanted to feel and wanted to try or wanted to do to honor your partner. And you might not like it, and you don't have to do it ever again if you don't like it. But that's been something that like I've come up against pretty often, that like, what do you mean you have a dick? What do you want to do with it? You want to put that in me? Well, like, what do I do with my dick? Do I get to use my dick too since you have one? Like, it all gets very confusing in a way that like I wouldn't think it needed to be, but for some reason it is.
That's hysterical. Okay, so then along the lines of what we're talking about, when would it be appropriate, like clearly not like while you're having drinks the first time or coffee, or like just meet them out somewhere on the street and just be like, but by the way, do you mind if I like, how do you feel about strap-ons and blah, blah, blah. But like, when do you find that it's like, how do you bring it up? When do you bring it up so that it doesn't just like, you know, or is it just when you're in the bedroom having conversations? I hate saying bedroom because you don't just fuck in a bedroom, but when you're in those, when you're starting to play or whatever, you know, how do you, and my questions are more along the lines of giving people ideas of how to have these conversations, because clearly you and I have made like a practice of trying to figure out how to create this language and have like the most wonderful ideal scenarios for ourselves and for others, but other people haven't had that opportunity. So how, like, when do you bring up the things that are important to you? And it doesn't matter if it's a strap on, or if it doesn't matter if it's hot wax, it doesn't matter if it's ropes, it doesn't matter if it's fucking I want to put on lingerie while you fuck me, like it, and you're a dude. It just whatever it is. But like, when do you find, how do you bring it up? When do you bring it up? What's, do you kind of like put out a little like teaser and just see if they're like open to having conversations? Like, what have you found that works?
So I think that waiting until you are like in the bedroom is not the right answer. I know that that can be like most alarming settings for some people. Some folks are like, oh, well, like, we're here, we've already decided it's happening, so like we're just gonna go with whatever comes up. Absolutely not. Because if that's the time that something is brought up that you are absolutely against, then you're either put in a situation where like you have to say no to the whole thing when like you would have been okay with everything but that, or you're saying yes to something that you absolutely don't want because you don't want to sacrifice the rest of it. So I say bring it up as early as possible. Research shows that you know whether or not you want to fuck somebody within 7 minutes of meeting them. So I think once you've made that decision, it is important to start figuring out how you want to broach the topic. And it doesn't have to be, the advice that I usually give is that it doesn't have to be as pointed as like, well, this is
What sex do you like?
something you think about. It be as simple as like, well, what do you think about blank? Or like, have you ever heard of blank? Have you ever tried blank? It doesn't have to be like, this is what I'm into, and if you're not into it, then this isn't happening. Now, granted, if it is like a non-negotiable for you, then that could absolutely be the way that you bring it up. But if it's something that you feel like you can work your way up to, or if it's something that you don't necessarily have to engage in with every partner, and you could maybe leave it out of this dynamic with this person if they're not into it, then I say just be a little broad about it, be a little vague about it. Like, so there was an article in Cosmo about wax play. Did you read it? Have you ever tried it? Well, how did it feel? What did you think? Well, you haven't tried it. Would you be into it? Like, well, I got some candles in the crib, so like, you want to come over and we can go? Like, you can really gauge, and it's not always in what the person says, right? Because we've all said yes to some shit that we didn't really want to do.
Of course.
But I think that minding somebody's like body language, if they get like a little shifty and uneasy in their seat when you bring something up, or if there's like a long pause before they respond, that could be your
Or
answer.
if they go to the bathroom and never come back.
Exactly. They're like, yeah, I'm gonna go for a smoke break.
For
And
a
then the
sec
smoke
and
break
run.
lasts the whole night, then maybe they weren't into that.
Yeah. And I think it's helpful also. I'm just going to say this, but like if you're with someone and you're on the first date or you just met them at the club or whatever, and just being like, so, because I think that people don't realize that you can literally just, if there's something that's uncomfortable that you want to bring up, you literally can just speak through it, right? So saying something along the lines of like, which would be honest. In my last, I just met you, you're cool. So like, I don't want to freak you out, but I just want to say like the last time I kind of got along with someone, we just met each other. The last time I kind of had like a cool connection with somebody, there are things that I like to do sexually that wasn't compatible with them. So I learned just to be like open about it and kind of like talk about that. Would it be cool if I just like, would you be open to like us talking about what you like and what I like? Because I don't want to ever have you be talking about them. I don't want you to ever be in an uncomfortable situation. I want to make sure that you're comfortable with things, and I don't want to take your time if, we spend weeks together and then something comes up that really was kind of like just made you feel uncomfortable. Would you be open to a conversation like this? I think it's really important to tell people like talk like you would to that you're trying to explain to your best friend something, and just talk through it. It's hard sometimes for people to even figure out how to bring something up, so
Yeah, I think that those types of conversations, and starting with something like, would you be open to talking about blank,
mhm,
is a really healthy way to broach the topic, because it gives the person the opportunity to say, no, I'm actually not comfortable talking about that.
yeah,
Or that's not something I have space for today, but maybe we can talk about that next time we go out.
not
So,
down for that conversation right now, but maybe in the future.
yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you might absolutely be in a situation where it's like, hey, I want to talk about all of my kinks and everything that I'm into. And like, I'm so attracted to this person that I want to tie them up and suspend them from my ceiling right now. And this person is like, I actually would like to get to know you outside of a sexual context, outside of a kink context. And so eventually I would like to get there. But right now, I would like to talk about where you grew up and where you went to college and like how you get along with your brother and sister. And like that is totally fine. And there are ways to like say no in an affirming way without it being like, oh my God, I can't believe you're into that. That's awful. That's horrible. Like, you don't have to freak out. You
Mhm.
can say, not today. You can say, that's not my kink, but I don't want to yuck your yum. Or you can say, I've never heard of that. Tell me more. Or like, we can explore that once I've learned a little bit more about it. There's like a billion ways to say no.
I'm also the type of person, just to give people this option as well. I love all of your yucks to your yums and all of the options that you just gave people. That's awesome. and some, because I believe in, I enjoy open relationships, and by open I mean honest. So like, someone wants to tell me they want to go fuck 5 people, like, thank you, darling, go enjoy that. Like, because there's nothing I can do to stop someone from doing what they're doing, so I'd much rather know and be a part of it than be the last to know, but yet share so much of my life and my body and my intimacy and stuff like that with them. So something I tell people, if their kink, if you will, far exceeds anywhere that I'm comfortable with, or rather just interested in, I'll tell them, go enjoy. I'd actually love to know about it and learn about it. Tell me how it was if you want. Take pictures. I don't give a fuck. But go enjoy yourself. Go explore that, because I don't want them, I might not want to not be with them, but I don't want to shut them off from the things that are important to them, you know? So there's a lot of, but that just depends on how people are. A lot of people would never want to share something that's theirs. You know what I mean? Like, you can't imagine having someone that you feel so close to being with someone else, you know? I can't imagine having someone that I feel so close to having to shut down a part of themselves or lie to me or cheat just because they're not comfortable saying something to me, you know?
Yeah,
So,
I very much feel the same way. Like, I'd much rather have an uncomfortable conversation than be lied to, or than put either of us in the position where we're not honoring our full selves. So we got to sit there and stare at each other until we figure out the words to say what we need or what we want, then that's fine. But I ultimately would rather us have what we want, or some like compromised version thereof, than to just go without.
mhm. Absolutely. I like that. Um, so for those who are less kinky, or those who are more kinky, whatever the heck that means, what advice would you give people in terms of like, just kind of like normalizing a little bit if someone's really into stuff and they judge themselves? Because a big part of what this podcast and the movement that I'm starting, the Re-Educate Humanity, is about taking away the shame that people have around not just their sexuality, but sex in general, or desire in general, or attraction or interest. Like, you literally can be interested in, you know, whatever turns you on, whatever you're curious about. And then you take that back all the way to the, like, the most normal, if heterosexual is what people consider normal, like missionary style, whatever, or just being attracted to people when you see them walking down the street. But religion and spirituality teaches us that inherently our sexuality is bad and wrong and evil, and going to send us straight to hell, you know? So that gut feeling that we have every time we feel turned on, whether we're consciously aware of it or not, or how much work we've done to authorize our own sexuality, we still have a little bit of weirdness around it. And I think as humanity, if we can push through that, we'd be just generally happier human beings. So along the lines of de-shaming, if someone is more prone to, like, whatever kinky would mean, or they're in a relationship with someone who is and they're not, what kind of like advice could you give people to more or less to take away the shame that they have around being curious? They've never given themselves permission to play in this space, stuff like that.
So a lot of our shame is internal. We bring a lot of shame with us to our relationships, from stuff that we encountered long before we met the person that we're dating or playing with. Like you said, religion plays a large part into how we understand our sexuality and access to our bodies. There could be something that, your parents said when you were younger, or you heard your relative judging another family member because of something that they knew about them. And you're like, well, I don't want my aunties talking about me like that, so I just can't do that. Or if I do, they can't know about it. And so there's a whole lot of people operating in the I'm going to do what feels good to me, but nobody can know about it. And that further creates shame, and it lets the shame continue on because it's happening, but we're not talking about it. We're not acknowledging it. We're not normalizing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so reframing what we think of as normal is the first step. Just because you see something a lot doesn't mean it's normal. It means you see it a lot. What you see a lot is there a lot on purpose. It's because large corporations paid lots and lots of money for it to be visible in lots of ways, or because regulations were put in place to push out other versions of that thing, or other iterations of that thing. So even looking at social media, as diverse as social media is, and as much representation as you will see of diverse identities and sexualities, social media is still censored. I just had a post taken down yesterday. So it's not about what happens most often, it is about what is allowed to be seen and what you allow yourself to be exposed to. So I think that once you reframe what you think of as normal, you allow yourself to be exposed to what it is that you really want. So allow yourself to follow some folks on Instagram and on other social media platforms that show what you're attracted to or what you might want to try. And then beyond free social media access, you can subscribe to people's Patreons and OnlyFans so that you not only get to see what it is that you're into, but you get to pay people to continue to create content that you want to see, because that content is being constantly censored and limited on free platforms. So going and purchasing and subscribing to what it is that you really want to see can give you access to it in that way. And then sharing it with your partner, being able to sit there and say, like, let's watch this video together, and seeing how you feel about it. It might spark a conversation, or it might not even lead to words. You might just be able to each other and know that you both feel really good about what you're looking at, and it's on from there. And if that's not the response, then it'll at least spark a conversation. It'll at least lead you to, well, what did you think about that? Like, it gives you space to say, I thought that was really hot. Like, is that something you might want to try? Or like, I think that, I don't know, you could be watching like a video of a threesome and be like, I think that was really hot. Like, is that something you might want to try? Or like, just seeing where your head's at. And it gives you, a lot of people are afraid of what they have never seen before. A lot of people are afraid of what they don't know exists. And so showing somebody that it exists can be the first step to opening their mind to exploring that for themselves.
What do you think the fear is?
Oftentimes it's judgment and consequence. Whether it's a fear of,
judgment and consequences?
Yeah, like whether it's the fear of like your parents judging you, your family, your coworker, your friends, or even your partner judging you and whatever like negative things they might have to say about it. But like I said, depending on where in the country you live and depending on the communities that you're in, there are certain things about your identity or about your sexual practices that could cause you to lose your job, lose custody of your kids, lose, certain relationships and affiliations, positions in organizations and stuff. So it's really important that you are able to trust the people around you with your truth. And so it can be really scary to say, I'm into, whatever it is that you're into. It could be something as simple as sex toys. Like there are states where sex toys are banned. And so being able to say like, I'd really like to buy a vibrator, for some people is terrifying.
There are states where sex toys are banned?
Yeah, I want to say Alabama and Mississippi. There's two of them. I could be wrong. We can like look this up and put this in show notes so we can get it right.
We'll let the folks at home know. So what about the whole concept? What do you think about the idea that if we all were like free sexually, there would be no difference between us and the beasts? This is religion's argument against sexuality and against just following your desires and cravings and urges, which by the way, I've always lived that way. And to me, I think I have a really healthy relationship with sex and sexuality because it doesn't drive me. My definition of like going into it for so long and not shaming myself and not pushing it away, it doesn't control me like I think it doesn't control me. Maybe it does. I have no idea. Like I think most people, but that's the religion. That's the religion's argument is that if we all just gave into our sexuality and our desires, we'd be no different than the beasts, and we would all just be savages and have no societal norms and regulations, and we'd all sin and be horrible human beings.
So my first counter argument to that is like, what would be wrong with that? What would be wrong with like living freely and like developing systems that honor diverse sexualities? and like
Yes.
don't prioritize, capitalism over sexuality. But that's a whole separate conversation. But my thing there is like people assume that freedom in sexuality means that you have let go of any sense of ethics, any sense of morality, any sense of loyalty. And it is completely possible to have loyalties and to have morals and to operate in ethics and still be sexually free and still be sexually satisfied. And so, this idea that, like, oh, if we were just able to, like, have sex with whoever we wanted to, however we wanted to, then the world would go to chaos, then that means that like we would essentially let go of like any semblance of family structure or any semblance of like love and loyalty that comes with that. And so that's one of those like philosophical fallacies that like just isn't fucking true. People will always have like a concept of loyalty. People will always have a concept of like bonding, whether it's called a family or a tribe or whatever else. Like there will always be people that you want to take care of and make sure are okay. And they don't always have to be your spouse or your children. They can be other people, and those structures can look like whatever you decide that they look like. But there will always be ways that people connect and want to take care of each other. So, with that in mind, free sexuality is not going to like wipe that out. Being able to have sex freely is not going to erase the idea of wanting to make sure that the people you care about are okay.
I love that you brought that up too, because that's the concern, is that it would like kill the family, the family dynamic, and that people wouldn't, how would people stick around and take care of their kids and all that kind of stuff. But it's true that it also takes a village to raise a child, and that people do have predispositions to taking care of people that they feel close to and connected to. And even in that moment, I like the phrase, a season, a reason, or a lifetime. And if people have hardships or hurt around like relationships in their life, whether they're familial or friendship or lovers, I tell people, think about that: season, reason, or lifetime. They were in your life for a season or a reason or a lifetime. So if you're an orphan or grew up in the foster care system and you never had real set parents, you didn't even have like a set of foster care parents that really you even considered parents, but you had probably 20 to 50 people that were like parental figures or somehow guardians, even if they weren't the best people in the world, and they were in your life for a season, a reason, or a lifetime. So I love that you bring that up, because I think that we as human beings are not evil and not bad, and we're not on a mission to try to become, God-fearing human beings. We're on a mission to try to have as much fun as possible and hurt as few people as possible along the way, because if you hurt other people, you hurt yourself. So if people, I, I wish for a world where people live, and they pursue what their passions are and their desires are, because oftentimes you can have an instinct or desire or craving, and you go and you explore it. And it was more exciting that it was a taboo than it was that you actually wanted to partake in it. So you kind of got a little taste, maybe even stepped out in your relationship, but then you're like, oh, fuck, thank God I didn't get caught. I really don't want that. I really do want this person. So when you push it, it's not this thing that just grows in your brain. You actually go try it out. And the only way you can know something for sure is real or good or bad or real or not for you is by taking action and seeing what consequence you get, how it feels when you take the action, and then you have a real data point by which to take a next step. But I think, like you were saying, capitalism and society and all that have to keep us in a box so that we feel that there's like things you do that are good and bad, so that if you buy this, then you're good, and if you don't buy this, then you're bad. So it does come down to that, what you brought up about like the connection between sexuality and capitalism, being able to make sure that people act a certain way and don't step out on what's normal and not perverse and weird behavior, so that we can have a society that we can be sheep in and we can be zombies in. And I know I've went off on a little bit of a tangent, but it makes me very sad, because I think that we as human beings leave like 99% of living on the table. And I think that it's in the form of our sexuality, because if you're really free and open sexually, I don't mean by having sex. I just mean not judging yourself and being, you can just watch certain things in porn, or you can just be open to conversations and not judge yourself and not judge others. Your brain is going to operate differently. You're going to be a higher functioning human being. You're going to be a happier human being because you're not judging yourself about the thing that people judge themselves the most about in this world, you know? So I would like to live in a world where everyone can have these open conversations. That's what I'm aspiring for with these dialogues. So
Absolutely. The conversations are the start of it all. Like if we're able to open dialogue about things that we don't know and don't understand, then that'll open our minds to so much more. Like there's plenty that I don't know. Um, and plenty that even if I know more about it, I still won't be into. But knowing that it exists and knowing that it's a thing in certain people's lives is great and it's wonderful and it improves your concept and understanding of the world. Just because you're not into something doesn't mean that it doesn't get to exist for other people. And I
mhm.
think that that's where a lot of people get stuck, that because something doesn't work for them or because something has hurt them in the past or it just, didn't work out for whatever reason, or they're scared of it because they don't know enough about it.
Mhm.
They create this idea that like, oh, no one else gets to have it. That's simply not true. Other people get to have all sorts of things and it really has nothing to do with you.
Powerful. I love that. Well, on that powerful note, I'm going to wrap it up for us because I think we've given people plenty to think about and hopefully talk to themselves about, write about, talk to their partners about. But I really want to thank you for coming and talking about all this stuff and talking about your own personal experience and how you got to where you are. Is there anything else that you'd like to share that we really haven't gotten to talk about?
There's so much that we could share, but I just want to encourage folks to follow me online at Slut of the Month. I post a ton of things there.
Not forget that
My
handle. How did you get that handle? That's a great.
So that
Oh,
handle or that title was given to me by Amber Rose and the My Slutbox platform. So they curate a monthly subscription service that includes a zine that has all sorts of like sexuality information and vocabulary builders. They had a whole like A to Z queer dictionary for their Pride edition, which was the one that I happened to be featured in. Um, and so their slut of the month is somebody who is doing work to make the world a safer place for free sexuality and sexual exploration, and even dialogue around sexuality. So there have been plenty of sex workers, sex educators, therapists who have also received the title of Slut of the Month along the way, but I was the first. So I decided to make that my Instagram handle because I think that's a big fucking deal.
it's a great one too. It's a great handle. So at Slut of the Month on Instagram. And
Yes.
what else should we remember you by?
Well, there are a couple of taglines that I go by that give peeks into my personality. So if you come to any of my events, you'll hear me introduce myself as Jennifer Eden, aka Slut of the Month, aka Femme Daddy, aka J.E. Heartbreak, aka Biggie Shorty. Pronouns are she and they because I am a real nigga and a bad bitch at the same damn time. So that is what folks should know about me. I think that, like I said, my identity as a Black, queer, non binary femme goes with me everywhere that I go. It is not something that I get to take apart and leave pieces of at home. So, all of my Blackness, all of my queerness, all of my femininity and masculinity go with me in every setting. And they inform the way that I see the world and they inform the way that the world interacts with me. And I think that that's really important for people to remember as they're interacting with people in kink, in relationships, in just walking around in your hometown. Know that people are much more than you see them as. You
Mm,
might look at me and just see a Black girl, and that's fine, but more than that. I'm a lot more complex than anything you can tell by simply looking at me. And that is the case for literally 100% of human beings on this planet. You do not know everything that there is to know about somebody simply by looking at them. Therefore, you do not get to pass judgment or restrict anybody's freedom based on looking at them.
love it. Thank you. Powerful, powerful way to end. Thank you, Eden. I really appreciate your time, and maybe we'll do this again sometime soon. I appreciate it. And thank you,
For
everyone,
having
for
me.
listening. Thank you, Eden.
Right.